Hi, hello, and welcome to Space Terminal's online summit. This is powered by the Design Terminal, and it's taking place as within the ex-Europe Horizon 2020 project. Now, welcome back if you were watching this morning, and if you are joining us first up, then welcome to the summit here, and I hope you're really going to enjoy it. The whole purpose of the summit, really, is to look at people who are working within the space tech industries and really share knowledge amongst different people about what they're doing and how they're operating. Also, to recognize the potential that these space tech industries have to alter our lives and the future of our lives. And not only that, but we'd like to build and create a network of people and inspire you at home, because if you're thinking about maybe taking part, starting up, hopefully you'll get some inspiration from what's going to happen next. Now, over the next 60 minutes, we have 3 really interesting panel discussions taking place. The first one, which is about to start in a few minutes, is all about space tech and the climate crisis. Then coming up after that, we're going to be looking at how space industries actually influence our everyday lives here on Earth right now, without us even knowing it. And then finally, we're going to be looking at how space can actually service and enhance business here on Earth. So let's move to that first topic. And it really is quite a hot topic at the moment, space and climate. And I'm sure all of you are aware that right now in Glasgow is COP26, the big discussion about what are we going to do, how are we going to avert this climate crisis around us. And we actually have 3 people who are already operating within this and who are going to talk about it. So let me introduce the people to you on our panel discussion. So first up, we have Max Gulde. Hello to you, Max. He's founder of Constel-R. And Constel-R monitor the temperature of the planet and then supply that information to different stakeholders and organizations. We have Alexander Gunkel, who's the founder of Space for Good, which I think almost speaks for itself. He's very interested in conservation and the building of smart cities. And then finally, we have Inbal Becker, who's the director of NASA Harvest, which I think as well is another great title. And NASA Harvest is really about the application of satellite information to help the development of agriculture. Now, hello to all 3 of you. I've got a question I'd really like to put to the 3 of you, and I'm going to give each of you a moment to answer that question. Now, I was listening to some feedback from what's happening in Glasgow at the moment. A very interesting quote was given yesterday. And it was said that the only way we are going to avert this climate crisis is by getting science to up their game and implement more science and get humans to change their behavior. And what I think is that that's basically what technology does. It brings together science and it gets us as humans to interact with that science and alter our behavior. So I'm going to ask, ladies first, Inbal, if I could come to you, how do you see this happening? So what kind of changes of behavior do you see happening with the kind of science that you're bringing with NASA Harvest? Perhaps if you could give us some insight there.
Sure, great. Thank you, and thanks everybody for the invitation, and it's great to be here. So going back to what NASA Harvest is, because I think that's very much at kind of the core of what you're asking for. It's NASA's program on food security and agriculture, but we sit within the Applied Sciences division. And so what that means is really our mission is to try to help and bridge between science into operations, into applications. And within our case, it's specifically around agriculture. And a lot of really what we do is try to make sure that we're developing science backed and informed, or translating really data into scientifically solid information that can be then helped to inform agricultural decisions really across the entire agricultural sector, whether we're talking about humanitarian organizations to governments down to farmer as well. And I think specifically in the climate space. I think we know that agriculture is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases and to climate change, but it's also one of the sectors that are most impacted by climate change, by a warming climate, by more erratic climate, more extreme weather events. And so it's really important for us, and what satellites provide is a transparent, is a timely way to monitor agriculture, to monitor the impact of various extreme weather events, to be able to monitor the change through time. And by looking at the past, also looking into the future, if you think about adaptation, if you think about suitability. So a lot of areas within agriculture and sustainability is that what we're trying to do under Harvest. So, but of course, science and transition from science into applications is absolutely fundamental to what we do. And therefore, every activity that we have is guided by an end user, again, whether that's a government or a private sector organization, in, for example, in the sustainability space.
Great. Okay, thanks very much for giving us that. I'm going to come back to you, perhaps thinking it'd be really nice to hear in a moment, an example of how this application works. Let's turn to you, Alexander. So perhaps if you could, I suppose what I'm interested in is how you actually see some of the science or the knowledge of the area of industry that you're working with, how you see that applied, or applications that have been created to help apply that, and especially when it comes to human behavior.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and maybe to first pick up on this quote of that science needs to up the game.
Yeah.
I find it surprising that the ball is now being played towards the scientific community, which actually already have developed tools and applications which have been there for decades. So when it comes to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, that's not something we can only monitor and act against from the last few months or past few years. Actually, scientists have been doing great work over since the 80s, since the 90s, and using satellite Earth observation technologies for agriculture and forestry protection. Just the needs now, the disaster is basically more imminent, and now basically also have social enterprises jumping into the game, being somehow positioned between universities, research centers, and purely commercial for-profit enterprises, which realized the need for climate change mitigation and adaptation applications, while also realizing that they can't be completely dependent on scientific budgets or governmental support. And I think that's kind of ties in very nicely into the description of you and Inbal of that new companies, new approaches, and also new products and services are needed. And for Space for Good, we found our niche in developing monitoring, reporting, and verification application for social environmental impact initiatives. And when we speak about climate change and mitigation, we can distinguish between man-made and kind of nature-based solutions, where our organization has particular focus on nature-based solutions, and within nature-based solutions, particularly on agroforestry systems, which actually combine a lot of ecological but also economic benefits. And we realized through our work that one of the biggest bottlenecks is actually a better understanding of this very complex environment agroforestry systems are playing in, and where satellite Earth observation, both commercially and also non-commercial satellite data, can be of great added value to scale agroforestry systems, not only in the tropics, but actually also in temperate environments like in Europe. I believe that particularly in regenerative agriculture and agroforestry systems, remote sensing and space technology will play a great role. Organizations such as Max Costelier, will provide us with valuable data to actually better monitor and model this ecosystems to provide better insights for farmers and land operators on site.
Good. Okay. Well, I think you've almost sort of put the next question there. Let's move to Max. So how does it work then? I mean, give us an example of how, the data that you have will actually go into an initiative, a concrete example of how that could work.
Okay, so first of all, thanks, and also thanks for a segue in my direction, Alex. Basically, let me answer, or let me make one statement first. I completely agree with Alex, and I think also with Inbal, that just saying science needs to up the game isn't the answer. Science is telling us certain things for quite some time now, and we need to up the game by start listening to science. And there are countless examples, especially in the situation right now, we're in the pandemic, where we also started listening a little bit too late. So if we're going to the doctor and they've done this for the last 30 years in certain surgery, we shouldn't be claiming that we're the experts on this. So again, here, it's science is to deliver things, yes, but it's also us to then accept those things and to go to more data-driven approaches instead of just doing what we feel like doing at the moment. To give a very concrete example, so you already introduced this, the temperature monitoring system. I would rather say, let's say a water monitoring system could also be interesting, to phrase it that way. If you assume there's a farmer and the farmer, for example, is irrigating the fields, it's a very simple way. This would be a way on the production side. So then the question is, what kind of data is needed to optimize this irrigation? Just to give you a few numbers, 70% of all global water resources are going into irrigation, and about 60% of that is wasted because of non-ideal irrigation. So it's the water is the major driver of food production in the world. So irrigation is a key tool for that. The way we would do this is we would provide a index of how much water is available and how much water is needed for any given place on the earth. So let's also for the field of that farmer. In our case, we would use a temperature as a proxy to do so, daily temperature data at field scale. This would be fed into a soil moisture balance model. Maybe that's already getting too technical, but basically you have how much water is going in. That's something you know from irrigation and you know it from rainfall, and then how much water is going out. And that's the loss of water to the atmosphere is called evapotranspiration. And this can be measured very well by using temperature data over time. And so what will basically be provided to the farmer is an ideal amount of water with a very small margin of how much irrigation is needed for a certain plant in his fields. And right now, this would solve the problem for the farmer to always have to over-irrigate because the damage of under-irrigation is so drastic. Again, here it will need trust. It will need not only one application, we also need to protect things from the market side by crop insurance and so on. But this would be one very direct way of implementing this data. So measuring temperature, deriving water loss, deriving amount of water needed for the plants at this point, giving this information to the farmer, irrigating overnight, and then repeating the cycle over and over again. This would be the one concrete use case.
Yeah, and I think that's very nice that 60% of that water is wasted, and being able to control that gives a good idea of how that can help. Coming back to this point, that all of you have made about being surprised about science being asked to up its game, I think perhaps if I could come to you, Inbal, how do you get people to take action on the data? And I will have to keep you, if you could keep it within a minute, because I would also like to come back to Alexander as well. Because, I can imagine that, the people who most need that data may not have the technology or access to it. So, and if they have, how do you actually get them to, take action on it? Because we all know that data can be interpreted in many, many different ways.
Yeah. I think that's a really critical question, because I think what we've seen oftentimes in the remote sensing community and just in general scientific communities is you create all these products and they're scientifically good and you believe that they're great and nobody's using it, and you're saying, why aren't they using this to inform really important decisions? And I think part of it is that on the science side, we do have to up our game in the sense of translating data into information. And not only that, but developing products and information with those that are supposed to be able to use it, that need to be able to understand it, that need to be able to trust it, that need to be able to replicate and generate that in their own systems, in their own. And so for as an example, one of the core activities we're engaged in is called the GeoGlom Crop Monitor. This provides information on global crop conditions and updated on a regular basis. But we developed this in very close collaboration with the policy and economics community who this was developed for. And when we put out our initial products, they looked at it and said, what is this? We're economists. We don't understand what these maps look like, what these satellite data are. We're not going to use this. And so it took us really working with them to translate that information into something they could actually understand and use. And so I think what we don't put enough of an emphasis on when we're developing the science is making sure we're in a very close communication with that community, that end user community that needs to really really guide that development and the use of it, and also trust it so that they can then use it. If you develop even a great product and you give it to a Ministry of Agriculture, if they weren't involved in developing that, why should they use it to make decisions based off of that? How can they trust it? So I think that's something we need to do a much better job at.
I see. Good. And it sounds like you're getting people involved right from the beginning all the way through. Okay, we are coming very close to the end of this, which seems very, very quick. But so just quite quickly, Alexander, you mentioned nature-based solutions. If you could, 30 seconds, give us an example of a nature-based solution that is happening because of the information you've provided.
Very concrete example, we are operating in Indonesia and Borneo, where we are developing a monitoring and management platform for tropical agroforestry of around 250,000 hectares. And there, our solution in providing the operators and the landowners about their agroforestry operational plots and the nature conservation helps them to apply for carbon credits while increasing the yield of the agroforestry production. Accordingly, helping in the nature conservation, helping to create jobs for local employment, and also creating tree-based products which can be exported to different markets.
Wow. Okay, so that's very interesting. That's about how it all integrates in many different levels of the whole economy as well. Okay, and then a final question then for you, Max. You know, I have some experience working within the insurance industry, not as an insurer, but one thing that struck me watching a recent presentation was how they are taking information about what's happening to the planet that they're getting from space. And of course, this is having quite a detrimental effect on property prices, people being able to insure their own properties. So that's what I'm thinking is how, on one side, I can see that this information you're providing can be extremely beneficial. What about the danger?
That's a very good question. So there's always the danger. Every tool has its merits and every tool has a potential danger. So how
do you sort of, let's say, avoid that, or at least reduce the risk of that information being handled in a way that, you know, can maybe create another crisis for people?
So it's a very good question. It's not we have 100%. We're just very, very careful for what implications and for what customers we are giving our data out. That's at the moment the answer. What we're doing in the regular exercise, playing the supervillain. So really asking us the question: what is the worst thing you could really do with this data, and then try to act according to avoid that. That's something which will always be a challenge in the future. But maybe to end with a more positive.
Yeah.
Going back or closing the circle in science. In my opinion, a lot of the methods and a lot of applications already exist which could really help us in the current crisis. There's obviously more development needed, but if we were able to implement a lot of stuff which already existing right now in the scientific community are way better off than we are. So it's really, as Inbal said, we need to transport this to the end user. As Alex said, with this example, it needs to be inspiring. And I believe that we have a good fighting chance if we act now.
Wonderful. And that's a lovely way to end it, I think. A good fighting chance if we act now. And I guess if there's one message we can draw out of all of this, it's how to get people to sort of start to use these tools and use this information. As you said, it's out there already. It's just drawing the connections together. So thank you very much to Max Gulde, Alexander Gunkel, and to Inbal Becker. Thanks very much for your perceptions and your stories. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And we'll be back soon with our next panel discussion. We've got a couple of minutes break, which is all about how the space industry is actually already integrated into our everyday lives. So see you in a couple of minutes.